part of this and also for your introduction. You didn't say how much time I have. Do I have 3 hours or 5 hours?
No, I believe you have, is it 20 minutes? Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
10 minutes. I need the power of the Spirit to be able to speak in 20 minutes. But thank you very much. I'd like to share my screen. Right. So once again, thank you, and thank you to those of you who are participating. The title that I have chosen for this paper is God, Theology, and the Digital Age, as has been read to you. And I'm speaking as an African who lives in Africa and who works in an African seminary. But of course, I've had opportunity to engage with other seminaries across the world. And I'd like to begin with a read of my abstract, which I submitted, and is that the paper proposes to address the simple but complex issue of how digitality changes contemporary methods of theological inquiry. At the end of the devotion, a friend, a brother who prayed, Carl, prayed that God will help us to discern theologically and digitally. And I thought that was very apt, because we are at an age in which we cannot do theology without the digital. And in fact, we cannot use digital resources without encountering religion or faith. So in the abstract, I say that theology is about experiencing and making meaning in a world where the existence of supernatural reality or God is taken for granted, especially in an African context where we do not make a distinction between sacred and secular realities. Thus, in the intersection between religion and media, a question that knocks theological scholarship relates to the tensions arising from the attempts to domesticate the supernatural through the mundane for the purpose of accessibility and meaning making. Because in a sense, media space is also profane space. And so I have encountered in Africa Pentecostal churches, leaders whose aim is to sacralize space that has been profaned. And I find that very interesting and engaging in terms of my scholarship. Peter Horsfield has, for instance, drawn attention to how in the study of media and theology, for example, media is viewed not as individual instruments of communication, but as part of a conglomerate of technological and non-technological social mediation by which people access and contribute to processes of making meaning in their lives. In other words, it is virtually impossible in our age of media technology to engage in theological inquiry in any meaningful sense without those digital resources that have become integral to our religious lives. So what I do is to reflect on how the transition from manual to a digital age raises challenges regarding how theological inquiry is conducted, especially in non-Western contexts like Africa, where Christianity has taken refuge at this point in time. In other words, in a non-Western context, as I have stated here, Christian theology has been known as a systematic discipline honed in the Western Hemisphere for the consumption of others. And until the 19th century, for example, until the end of the 19th century, for example, Christianity was known as a white person's religion. In fact, we live in a very patriarchal society. So if I'm using the language on the street, I would say a white man's religion. In Ghana, for example, there was a very popular saying among children: when you are going to church and you see a white man, go back home. It's almost like you have seen God. So as a white person's religion, it was also the principal means of civilizing the heathen. And those of you interested in anthropological studies will know how Africa was problematized in terms of heathenism. So Christianity was the means of civilizing the heathen through formal education and various catechisms, which is a word that we have encountered in our time together. So the Bible and theology as the systematic study of God and how he relates to creation and humanity meant Christianity was not simply a white man's religion, but was also a religion of the book. It's a religion of text. Okay. I'm trying to move to the next slide. It's not working for me. Okay. Okay. So sorry, I was having problems changing my slide. Now, so the Western hegemony over Christian theology has been broken. Now I'm talking about media technology and the new developments. It's been broken because of the multiplicity of sources and resources that we have for engagement in theological discourses that is made available by cyber technology. Because what Digitality does is that it provides access. It's also convenient, it is quick, it is smart. So digital media has transformed the way we read, the way we study, even the way we refer to the Bible. And in the paper, I have talked about how the students in my seminary who are expected to bring Bibles to church now bring tablets and phones instead of a solid Bible. Jeffrey Spikers refers to this transition from printed text to digital forms as liquid scripture. And I like that expression much when I encountered the book. Liquid scripture, by which is meant the ways in which the Bible is translated from solid text to image and sound. But we have to remember that even before the Bible became solid text, it was oral. The Bible is founded on an oral tradition. And so if you consider that Africa itself is a context of orality, then there is something that you can say resonates. There's some resonance between the African world and the biblical world in terms of how information is captured and mediated. In liquid scripture, the printed text has been rendered into liquid. Liquid, ones, if you like, and zeros, the language of all things digital, whether as texts on a digital screen, as narration on a digital audio player, or both static and moving images on a digital video player. And we have experienced part of it this morning. You know, in the course of the devotion, we had to put words and expressions on the screen, something that was not possible just a couple of years ago. So Christianity theology in a media age, with Africa in focus. Methodologically, there are a number of implications that we draw out of the developments I have outlined. The first is the oral, implicit, spontaneous, or grassroots theology that can now be captured and stored before it is lost. Now, I have supervise students writing theses, histories, and so on. And they have really struggled to recover certain oral information that they need for their work. Today, it is possible for this oral, or what I'm calling implicit or spontaneous or grassroots theology, to be captured before it is lost. So the methods have changed in terms of you don't even need to go and conduct interviews within families to find out information about their ancestors. The second is African theology in its popular form is now accessible through cyber technology. And when I say in its popular forms, I mean the way theology is expressed. So you can go on the website of any African independent or Pentecostal church and have access to all the sermons that have been preached, all the programs that have been held. And yesterday, I even talked about the virtual Holy Communion and so on and so forth. Thirdly, the study of theology digitally means secularization has not necessarily undermined Africa's religious and theological interest. And I think that in a sense, this is also applicable to parts of the West. People may not be in church physically, but they are using cyberspace to access religious resources, to encounter the numinous, as I explained in the paper. Fourthly, biblical theology now takes place within cyber media generation context steeped in visual culture. So we are reading and we are seeing, and people are able to make a judgment for themselves. In other words, the resources have expanded. And therefore, when we are doing theology, you cannot write a methodological statement on any theological inquiry without making media or cyber technology part of the method. And if you look at the research, books on research and writing that we have had in the past, a lot of them did not take account of media. But now some of them are being revised, and the new ones that are coming have to provide guidance to scholars and researchers on how to use cyber technology in theological studies. So the fifth, accessibility to theological data means no one Christian tradition can be the sole custodian of theological truth. And that is what I mean by the expansion that we have experienced. So what are my conclusions in this study? First, methodologically speaking, the study of theology has changed with the emergence of highly sophisticated media and cyber technologies, a change that we all need to come to terms or come to grips with. And therefore, whether you are interested in the intersection between religion and media or not, as a theological educator in particular, you cannot teach systematic theology, pastoral care and counseling, or church history without accounting for cyber technology as part of the method. One of my colleagues, for example, who is in pastoral care and counseling, has been looking at pastoral counseling and social media, for example. Because this is where the people who need help are. They are searching for answers in cyber technology. Secondly, the traditional sources of theology have now expanded to include information communication technology sources through which the Christian faith is now accessed and expressed. And this is what I meant when I talked about encountering faith in cyberspace. Third, the growth of digital media, although challenges the traditional source of theological truth, may not necessarily be bad for the authority of religious functionaries. because religious functionaries can now have, if you like, a wider access. People are sitting in Kenya or Ghana or South Africa, and they are disseminating religious resources to people around the world. In fact, religious functionaries in particular can now speak, if you like, of a fan base similar to other celebrities, entertainment stars, and so on, because of the digitization of theology. So our method needs to account for that. Fourthly, digital media offers the opportunity for the assessment of theological claims and opportunities, for comparing them with what may be available elsewhere. So comparative theology has been made easier, and that also needs to be accounted for in our method. Through digital sources, theological information, even those from oral sources, can now be stored, accessed, and disseminated in ways that were not possible in the past. Increasingly, then, I'm beginning to see African students who would otherwise have traveled to the West and stayed for 4, 5, 6, 7 years to study, simply because that's where the resources are, now don't have to travel. But in the past 10 years, I've had 2 colleagues who have gained PhDs in theology from foreign universities without traveling, because not only are they able to engage with their professors through cyber technology, but also the information they needed for their work was all available to them. Finally, the availability of cyber technology means redefining the nature of the church's institutional formation, because increasingly the church is ceasing to be the sole custodian of theological truth. What cyber technology does is that it offers the opportunity for us to engage with other sources and resources, and also engage in discourses beyond denominational boundaries. And so with this expansion, what it means is that we have to rethink our method, especially in non-Western contexts like Africa, where in the past we have had to go to the West to look for resources. I studied in the University of Birmingham, and in the University of Birmingham in the UK, in the university library, I encountered resources on my own country, Ghana, that were not available in the country. That kind of space, that kind of gap has been bridged by cyber technology. And so my suggesting is that, especially for those of you interested in non-Western theology, we would need to account for digitality and cyber theology, as we cyber technology, as we do theology for the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kwabena, and thank you for reminding us that, we often think in the West that the internet is the equalizing space, but there are a lot of inequalities based on kind of different cultures and different interactions, and just even the technology itself. So thank you for that. Unfortunately, our planned respondent isn't here, but Simon Werrett has agreed to step in. He's a student in the MA in Digital Theology at Spurgeon College, and he's also minister of the Free Evangelical Church just outside London. And so we thank you, Simon, for willing to step in for a brief response.
Running in the deep end, I haven't got time to change my shirt. But in response, you say in your paper that Christianity was a non-Western, non-white religion, and that up to the 19th century it changes. But I think that the difficulty with digital theology is that it's going to bring it back to the perverse of the rich and those who've got the digital access. I've got many friends in Kenya and pastors who we've worked with through physical teaching at a Bible school who don't have access to the internet, who don't have access to mobile phones to come to a conference like this. So that although a lot of the work goes online, it does reduce the opportunity of access to it in theological circles. So I think there's a danger there that digital theology may again start to become the right of the those who can afford it, as opposed to obviously the printing press and printing books, which was circulated much wider. And we spoke about anyone can do it. Now digital comes and spoke about digital comes and anyone can write, anyone can do it. I think yesterday we spoke about the sin influences was the key word from yesterday. And of course, that's the difficult with digital theology. Anyone can write a theological book on digital theology, and they could upload it to Amazon, and you then got to identify what is the providence behind that, who is the speaker. So although there's a wide variety of resources, they aren't accessible, and needs providence behind it to ensure that actually what they're saying. And we were speaking about it's been more available, etc. And I was thinking back to what Socrates said when you write it down, you no longer remember, but you just know where it's recorded. And we do have oral stories. It's great that they're recorded, but then are we actually remembering the stories, or actually remembering where they are recorded? And Syker in his book, when he speaks about the printing press, and of course it's mentioned here that other people now can write, can read, can comment, but that's what happened when the printing press came first through. It was no longer the educated people who could read just the scrolls or the codex. It became available to everyone who could read, and of course as education developed, then more people could read, more people could comment, and actually more people could challenge perhaps the priest on what they were saying. So I think it's good, but it's no different as digital theology develops than the development of the printing press, as Syker identifies in his book. So I think there's a lot in your paper, but I think there's a lot of challenges for us to think how we engage with it, and we engage with those who perhaps don't have the access to the wider world that we are so fortunate to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your response.